What is unfolding in Minnesota right now is no longer just a protest story. It has become a serious constitutional confrontation involving federal authority, civil liberties, and the limits of immigration enforcement inside American cities. The situation began with a large-scale federal immigration operation in Minneapolis known as Operation Metro Surge. The operation dramatically expanded ICE's presence in residential neighborhoods, bringing federal agents into direct contact with residents, bystanders, and community members who were not targets of enforcement. While federal officials framed the operation as necessary for public safety, many residents described it as sudden, aggressive, and destabilizing. Tensions escalated sharply after a Minneapolis resident, Renee Good, was shot and killed by an ICE officer during an encounter connected to the operation. The shooting immediately sparked protests across the city, with residents demanding transparency, accountability, and limits on federal enforcement tactics. What began as grief and outrage soon evolved into sustained demonstrations questioning the legality and conduct of the operation itself. As protests grew, clashes between federal agents and demonstrators became increasingly frequent. According to court filings, sworn testimony, and video evidence later reviewed by a federal judge, ICE agents repeatedly used pepper spray, chemical irritants, physical force, and aggressive vehicle maneuvers against individuals who were not engaging in violence. In several documented incidents, protesters and observers were detained without charges, pushed to the ground, or restrained after attempting to de-escalate tense situations. Some of those affected were not active protesters at all. Witnesses described being stopped while filming, observing from sidewalks, or attempting to calm crowds. In multiple cases, personal belongings were taken, restraints were applied, and individuals were released without explanation or citation. Civil rights attorneys argued that these tactics were not only excessive, but designed to intimidate and suppress lawful protest. The growing body of evidence prompted legal action, and the case soon reached a federal courtroom in Minneapolis. After reviewing hours of footage, sworn statements from protesters, and testimony from ICE leadership, a federal judge issued a rare and unusually detailed injunction against ICE and other federal immigration agents operating in the area. The ruling ordered agents to stop using chemical agents against protesters, to refrain from unnecessary force, and to cease detentions that lacked clear legal justification. The judge found that the conduct described in the evidence demonstrated a pattern rather than isolated mistakes, and that the actions of federal agents had chilled First Amendment activity. In language that immediately drew national attention, the judge compared the conduct to abuses seen during the civil rights era, stating that constitutional protections do not disappear during immigration enforcement operations. The ruling emphasized that federal authority does not override the rights of citizens and residents to observe, protest, and express dissent. The court was particularly critical of the federal government's defense. The judge gave greater weight to first-hand accounts and video evidence than to testimony from ICE leadership, which often relied on second-hand reports. In several incidents, the court found that agents appeared to act out of frustration rather than law enforcement necessity, including stopping vehicles without sufficient cause and targeting individuals who were actively trying to reduce tension. The injunction marked a significant legal moment. Legal scholars noted that it is rare for a federal judge to impose such explicit operational restrictions on federal law enforcement, especially in real time. The ruling effectively placed judicial limits on ICE's tactics, while protests were still ongoing. Federal officials responded forcefully. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem publicly dismissed the judge's findings, calling them exaggerated and denying that agents engaged in misconduct. Initially, the department claimed chemical agents were used only in response to violence. However, subsequent reporting and video evidence contradicted those statements, prompting a partial walkback. The Department of Homeland Security has since indicated it will appeal the ruling, setting the stage for a prolonged legal battle. Civil rights groups, including the ACLU, argue that the injunction does not go far enough and are pressing for stronger, permanent restrictions on federal enforcement tactics during protests. This has created a three-front standoff. On the ground, protests continue under heightened tension, with residents wary of renewed enforcement actions and federal agents operating under judicial scrutiny. In the courts, attorneys are preparing appeals and counter-arguments that could push the case to higher federal courts. Politically, the issue has become a flashpoint in the broader debate over immigration enforcement, federal power, and civil liberties. Supporters of aggressive immigration enforcement argue that ICE must be allowed to operate without interference, especially in sanctuary jurisdictions. Opponents counter that the Minnesota case demonstrates how unchecked federal authority can spill into civilian life, suppress lawful dissent, and erode constitutional protections. What makes this situation distinct is its longevity and depth. This is not a single headline or a fleeting controversy. It is an unfolding conflict involving real people, judicial intervention, and unresolved questions about how far federal power can extend inside American communities. As of now, no final resolution is in sight. Appeals are pending, protests continue, federal and judicial authorities remain at odds, and the broader implications of the case could influence how future immigration operations are conducted nationwide. Minnesota has become a testing ground, not just for immigration policy, but for the balance between enforcement and constitutional rights. How this conflict is resolved may shape federal law enforcement practices well beyond the state. This story is still developing, and its outcome will matter far beyond Minneapolis.